Good morning, Rajesh, and welcome. I think let's start at the beginning. Rajesh, your name is almost synonymous with Indo-German relations for over 3 decades, almost 35 years. So can you take us back to the beginning? How did it all start? And what was it that initially drew you to this intersection of German engineering and the Indian market?
Thank you. Thank you, Madhav. Thank you for having me on this podcast. Going back, actually, I think my childhood has also been strongly influenced by the Indo-German Connect. My father studied in Germany way back in the 50s. That time there were Indians who went to Germany primarily. There were two universities, or three, I would say, which were very popular. Aachen University, then Clausthal Sellerfeld for mining technology, and Berlin. So my dad went to Aachen and he studied metallurgy way back in the 50s.
Wow.
Then he worked in Germany and was very interesting, Madhav. The Rotkela steel plant was set up in the 60s, mid 60s, with the German technology and German aid.
Yes.
And in fact, my father then came through this German company and was part of the setup in Rotkela. And after the steel plant was set up, the company wanted to open an office in India. And then they asked my dad if he wanted to come back to India. And that's how. So I think throughout my childhood, I've had this influence of German culture because my dad could speak very German. He was very smooth in his German language. He had the connect with the German industry.
Yes.
And even as a child at the age, I think I was hardly maybe 5 years old. That was my first trip to Germany.
Wow, as early as that.
That's right. That's right. I spent almost a month because my parents were in Germany for a year actually. And I used to stay in India with my grandfather. So my granddad and myself during the winter months went to Germany. And I recollect, if I'm allowed, Mother, one very interesting because we went in December and
Yeah.
For me, it was the first time I really saw snow there. And I was not at all geared for the snow. And I remember I went to play with the children. And after 15, 20 minutes, I came back. My mom says, I came back crying actually because my feet had all got cold. They were almost blue because of the snow. And I was wearing the ordinary shoes. So that's why I think this is how my connect with Germany started at a very young age, Madhav. And I'm happy that it continues now. It still continues and hopefully will continue for the next few years also going ahead.
I'm sure. I hadn't realized in the time that I've known you, I hadn't realized that your connect with Germany was since such a long time, since your childhood, actually. Okay. So then, therefore, before even you came to lead VDMA or when you were about to lead VDMA and embark on this other journey, you clearly were a witness to this evolving landscape of German investment firsthand in India, as you mentioned the Rourkela plant. Can you perhaps share one or two anecdotes about these early days or something that was particularly memorable, which for you highlighted the potential of this Indo-German industrial partnership?
So, Madhav, I went to Germany in 91, actually. I started working in Germany in 91. This was the period when the reunification had taken place. Eastern part and western part had merged together. And one very interesting, I was working with this company. It was called Dolomitwerke. So they were into refractory bricks for the steel industry. In fact, I worked also on a very interesting project with that time it was Tata Refractories. So in fact, they took technology for dolomite and magnesite bricks from this German company. And for almost 6 months, I was involved as a young engineer. I think I was that time hardly 25-year-old. As a young engineer, I was involved with this project. And this, I think, really gave me a lot of insights into the Indo-German trade because we had regularly from Tata Refractories people coming over to this company, Dolomitwerke, and Dolomitwerke also preparing I was involved in some of the drawings also that time. And that time there was no CAD, Madhav, so we had to use the drawing board and use it. So I think some of the old drawings, if they check it, would still have my name also on that. But this was a good learning experience for me, Madhav, to understand a little bit of the culture and also about the technology, how actually a technology transfer takes place. And I think this has been a good learning experience that I've been able to carry forward during my career also.
So it's interesting. You mentioned you went to Germany in 1991 the first time. And as we know, the 90s or from 1991 is when India really started opening up and doing a lot of economic reforms. At that point, did you already see a huge potential in German companies coming to India? Did you already have some kind of a sentiment that India is at the cusp of opening up and Germany has a lot to offer this huge country?
Right. I think that time, Madhav, the perception of India was very different.
Hmm.
I think companies still in the early 90s didn't realize the potential that India had. I still remember when we were talking about these technology transfer, because
Hmm.
Tata Refractories was very keen that these German machinery suppliers for the refractory bricks, they have some presence in India. And I was part of many such meetings, and I remember it was always a struggle to convince the German companies to set up that time, because hardly any of them had offices in
Yes.
India. In fact, and Tata was very firm that unless you have at least some, even if you don't have an office, you should have
Hmm.
some service people, because once you deliver the machines, we will require some local support. This used to be at any meeting a perpetual discussion whether to set up the office, not to set up the office.
Hmm.
So I think that period still the potential of India was not realized. And I think in a way, even for the German, because for the German machinery manufacturers, the business in India was very limited, Madhav. So rightly so, I think at that stage, it would not have made economical sense for German companies to set up a base in India because of the limited business potential or the possibility they had that time.
Okay, even if they were working with an industrial conglomerate like Tata.
Absolutely, absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely.
And just before we move to the present, at that point in the early 90s, what were some of the cultural nuances or differences rather that you noticed that you've learned to appreciate over these years and that you feel are essential for collaboration between Germans and Indians?
Very good question, Madhav. I think there was certain cultural characteristics which were very prominent even then, and I think it still holds good today also, despite of so many years. I think the Germans in that sense, Madhav, are very process oriented and very true to their words, actually. So one is the process. It has to be a proper process, has to be followed, and true to the words that if you have a certain deadline, the deadlines have to be met, or at least you should inform well in advance. And I still remember when we were preparing the drawings, the technology, we had a very clear cut timeline. And I think there was no delay as far as I remember in the project from the German side in handing the drawings or handing the technology. Whereas from the Indian side, I think one of the biggest advantages was the flexibility. I think Germans are in that sense a little rigid. I
Mm,
mean to say, a mechanical engineer would only look at mechanical. He would not have delve at all on the electrical side, because he would say that electrical is not my domain of expertise. Rigidity comes because of their expertise in that particular domain
sure,
or sector.
sure.
And they become experts working on that domain or that particular sector. Whereas as Indians, the person he would have mechanical knowledge, he would have some electrical knowledge also. So they were much more flexible in discussing. Whereas for the Germans, when any questions for electrical came, then he had to call his colleagues from the electrical department to answer those questions. So it was a very interesting experience for me to see these intercultural nuances or the
Yeah.
experiences. And I think it was very interesting and a good learning for me at that stage.
Rajesh, that's a very astute observation, if I may say, because I think even as I study Indian culture and philosophy and identity, I think something that's very true is that we see the West, at least in India, we see the West as very Cartesian. So you focus on something, you focus on one particular field. Engineers just do engineering and they don't do anything else. Whereas I think in India, traditionally, at least, we've learned to look at, find the commonality in everything and find the connection in different domains.
Absolutely.
Of course, it's just a different approach and there are different outcomes and different ways of thinking. But I think
Absolutely.
this idea of the engineers that focus, I think today they say, what kind of an employee are you? Are you an I shape or a T shape
Right.
employee, as they say, right? So of course there are advantages to being an I shape, but I think increasingly, depending on the domain, you also require people with T capabilities as well. So
Absolutely. I think even the whole
hmm.
process is becoming more multifunctional, Mother. And that's where I think the T shape employee would be a better resource then.
Or at least have access to better tools and have greater awareness about what's going on, because there's so
Absolutely.
much that's happening in collaboration now. An engineer cannot afford to work in isolation, at least to the extent that he or she may have done so in the past.
Right.
So let's move forward about 30 years. Yeah. So in the next 30 years, of course, India's market develops. German companies increasingly see the attractiveness of the market, more opportunities. They start coming to India over the next 30 years. So we're at the point today in 2025 where German Mittelstand companies, and not just Germans, but many firms across the world are increasingly looking at India, not just as a market, but also as a strategic manufacturing and R&D hub. For example, Volkswagen, if I understand correctly, exports more cars from India than it sells actually in India. So the Indian market is relatively small for VW, but it exports and manufactures and exports more cars. So how is VDMA India actively facilitating the shift? And are there any examples of successful collaboration that perhaps exemplify this trend?
Mother, very interesting observation. And let me share my personal experience also here. So I started my journey with the VDMA 1997. And I remember that time when I started, I was very enthusiastic, was looking to get more German companies. And I must say, in Germany, when I used to go, I used to talk with the German companies about India, Indian market. I always got a very cold shoulder, actually. They said, oh, India, why do we need to invest in India? And the business wise also, Madhav, that time when I joined VDMA, the export of German machinery to India was hardly 500 million Deutschmark, not euros. That time we had the Deutschmark. So it was hardly 500 million Deutschmark. And even from the VDMA perspective, we hardly have that time about, I think, roughly around 220 member companies in India. So they used to tell me, yeah, it's such a small market. Why do we need to invest in India? And now, as you rightly said, Madhav, in these 30 years or about 25 years, the shift has been phenomenal. Now, in fact, whenever I'm in Germany, be it at an exhibition or be it at our head office in Frankfurt, there are always companies who are looking to interact with me to understand what is happening in India. And now it's no more the question of why do we need to invest in India? Now the question is where do we need to invest? How
Yes.
quickly or where should we establish ourselves in India? And that gives me a lot of personal pleasure also to see how the shift has happened from this 500 million Deutschmark. The export of German machinery to India has gone up to 4,200 million euros. From VDMA perspective, from 220 members, we now have about 600 VDMA members who are active in India. So it's been a phenomenal development also of the Indo-German trade, and the German machinery exports to India has really done well in the last few years. And I'm very optimistic that this would go further because the increased interest we are seeing since the last couple of years, Madhav, has been phenomenal with more and more German or European, because even
Yes.
VDM is becoming more and more European in nature now. So we have more and more European companies looking to come to India, establish themselves in India. And in fact, I would say there is now, in the last 1 year, almost every second week I have attended, or every week at least one inauguration, or once in 2 weeks an inauguration, either of a new factory, new manufacturing setup, or otherwise a tech center. So it's been a phenomenal development on the Indo-German trade, especially in the engineering sector.
Do you see India becoming a strategic manufacturing hub or an R&D center? Do you see more German firms saying, okay, there is talent in India to set up research and development there? Because traditionally R&D, even for Israelis, for example, has always been in Israel or Germany, for very high-tech economies. Do you see a gradual shift of them also setting up these centers in India?
Very good question, Madhav. And certainly, yes, I would say if you look at the evolution or the development, so initially the companies were using India as a low-cost base, more for the back office functions, service, answering the service calls and things like that. So from that stage, I think we have now really moved to high quality value addition work, what the Indian subsidiary is doing. And in fact, for example, Mercedes. Now, Mercedes R&D Center in Bangalore, Madhav, employs almost about 10,000 people. And it's the largest R&D center beyond Germany, which is there in India. And the amount of work they are doing here at the R&D center is really helping, augmenting, as well as doing some really innovative work for the car. Continental is another German good example. Now, Continental set up their GCC with about 4,000 people. I believe now they are close to 9,000, and I think they are aiming also to cross 10,000 people by end of this
But
year.
even in this GCC, the GCC is not so much back office. Because a lot of
Yes,
GCCs are now also transitioning
absolutely.
to R&D.
Absolutely, absolutely. So these are, of course, the larger companies, Madhav, but I would also like to highlight them, the so-called Mittelstand, the German family-owned businesses, the Mittelstand. Now they are also looking to set up these tech center, do some R&D work. Do a lot of work is happening on the automation industry 4.0 development. This we are seeing also family-owned businesses, Madhav. Perhaps the scale is different. They would not have the people say 4,000, 5,000. But so they normally start in a smaller number by 30, 40 people and then scale it up in a year or two to 450, 200 people. But that is where actually very high level, high value addition is happening in India. And another thing which is a good development, Madhav, is also, you asked about manufacturing earlier. Also on the manufacturing front, we find that many Indian subsidiaries of the German companies or the European companies have now become center of excellence. So that means that the Indian entity is producing certain machines or components which are being exported globally by this company. So there again, I think India is playing a very important role because then these components or machinery is being manufactured only by the Indian entity for the global operations of this company. So that's where I think there's a lot of we have transited quite well from low cost work to really high quality work, high value, where I think India has a lot of potential. We have good qualified engineers. We have engineers available at a reasonable cost. And this can really help and support the global operations of the German or the European companies.
And of course, you have plenty of engineers who are going to Germany for training as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Notwithstanding the visa issues, currently at least. So coming back to that, you said, as we've seen a lot of these firms have set up GCCs, and from there, those GCCs are moving from simple back office operations towards more R&D and research and innovate in India. So from Make in India, we're kind of going to innovate in India or design for the world. Now, are these innovation and design and research centers, are they primarily set up as standalone companies, wholly owned subsidiaries, or do German firms, at least the Mittelstand companies, do they seek out Indian engineering firms who they can partner with and create something? Or is it something that they just do on their own?
I think both ways, Mother. We've had cases also where, in fact, we've had a couple of cases where the German, especially the Mittelstand actually, they have acquired these Indian engineering companies with about 70, 80 people. And now they've integrated these companies also in there as a part of the global group. Has been integrated. Of course, we are continuously, as VDMA, we continuously also get a lot of requests from the German or European company who are looking now to collaborate more closely with the Indian engineering companies. Perhaps at this stage, they are looking in this first stage to collaborate, and maybe a couple of years down the line, they would set up their own. They would set up their own subsidiary or set up their own entity in India. But at this stage, they are looking at the Indian companies also to provide these engineering services for their global operation. So I think coming back to your question, I think we have seen both these examples, Madhav, of the companies setting up their own entities as a subsidiary, and secondly, also working a lot with the Indian engineering companies.
And do you see it happening in the other direction as well? Do you see Indian engineering firms who want a domain expertise in a specific product line or vertical? Do you see them increasingly going to Germany and looking at German firms to purchase? Because now Indian companies are buying firms from everywhere if they're looking to also acquire new markets and new technologies.
Absolutely. So rightly said, Madhav. And I think the biggest advantage is because Germany's locational and technological advantage in Europe. So Germany being more or less in the center of Europe also offers this good locational advantage to the Indian companies. And we are seeing now more and more Indian companies. And I think it's a very good development for our country also, Mother, because we find now companies, especially which are in the third or fourth generation, they have a well-established domestic market. The younger generation now who have studied abroad have more aspiration. want to go beyond shores now. They're looking at
Yes,
overseas market, looking at, I think that's where then Germany and Europe becomes a very attractive market. I think also one is the predictability is higher than if you compare
sure.
to US now. What we've seen, there's a lot of unpredictability in US, whereas in Europe or Germany, the predictability factor is quite high, as well as I think a strong market. And we are seeing, I believe now there are, in fact, they say around 500 Indian companies which have established themselves in Germany. We have some of the Indian companies, in fact, they've become totally global in certain sectors, especially when we look at the auto component sectors. There are a couple of very good examples of Indian companies who've bought. They have now something like 15 or 18 subsidiaries within Europe. So this has been a phenomenal development, what we have seen in the last years. And I think, again, this is something which in the coming years will get a further boost with the aspiration of our young generation, and also the new generation that is coming into the family-owned businesses. They are looking, really, they have large plans, large views, and money is not a problem anymore for them to set up, buy companies globally.
So Rajesh, things are going well. We've seen huge progress with German firms coming to India, and as we've seen now, the shift, there's a deeper shift, deeper integration with Make in India policies, with innovating and manufacturing in India. But I'm sure, as this is India, not everything goes smoothly. Can you perhaps share some of the challenges? What are the 2 or 3 top challenges that your member firms face when still trying to build out their businesses or R&D facilities in India?
Sure, Madhav. Yes, there are, of course, there are challenges that the companies are facing. And I think one of the biggest challenges is land acquisition and cost of land. I think that is quite a challenge. Predominantly also because, Madhav, see, the VDMA members are typically the Mittelstand
Yes.
family-owned businesses. Now, their requirement is not, they are typically looking at land parcel or land size of about maybe 5 acres going up to 10 acres. So that becomes a major issue, because although the state governments promise a lot, but then many of them are looking at larger land parcels. They are very keen if somebody is going for 50 acres, 100 acres, but somebody looking for a small piece of land, 5 acres, 7 acres. Now, this doesn't really excite the state investment boards or departments. So it becomes a little challenging for them. So they are basically left on their own to really look at buying private land either, and that becomes quite complex. As you know,
Yes.
land holding in India is a
Yes.
complex affair. It's not very clear always about regarding the land holding. So that is one of the challenges I think still the mid-sized companies are facing. And I think one of the possibilities or a solution to these would be the industry parks, which are more
Sure.
flexible
There are
on the
increasingly more and more industry parks coming up.
industrial parks coming up. The second challenge is, of course, one aspect which I didn't mention earlier, which has also really picked up, Madhav, in the last couple of years, especially I think with the geopolitical tensions with China,
Yes.
is India as a sourcing hub. Now, increasingly, German or European companies are looking to source more from India, which was not there earlier. And they want to develop India as an alternate to China for the sourcing. Now, when they're looking for sourcing, again, the quality plays a very important, and consistency in quality. Maybe the first batch you get good quality, but then maintaining that consistency in quality, I think, is a little bit of a challenge. The Indian suppliers are certainly improving, no doubt about it, but I think it's a gradual process, because getting to understand the requirements, the quality requirements from the German side, which is the quality requirements, safety on machines are much higher what they look at. So this still remains a little bit of a challenge for the from the German side. And of course, the third factor, which is, I think, the commitment part of it. As Indians, we are a little more flexible, especially on time and commitments, whereas for Germans, it becomes a little bit of an intercultural issue, because you commit a delivery at a certain period of time, and then a few days or 1 or 2 days before the delivery date, you then come up and say that it'll take another week or 10 days. So that becomes a little bit of an issue. Then the whole timeline or the whole planning goes wrong. And I think this is where there is some scope for improvement also from the Indian suppliers. And maybe here I would just like to highlight, since we were speaking about the intercultural issue, Madhav. So if you look at the German thinking, Madhav, it's actually, the German thinking is like a straight line. For them, it's time comes once, it doesn't, because on a straight line, the same point is not repeated. If you cross the point once, you don't come back to it again. In our culture, the Indian culture is more thinking on the circularity. So in a circle, the same point will come again.
We keep saying, if I don't do it in this life, I'll do it in the next. So
Right.
there's no hurry.
Absolutely. 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 So I think this is one of the, coming back to the intercultural issue, one of the big differences in the thinking from the German side or the European side and the Indian side, Mother.
I think Rajesh, you brought up an important point. I think that's where real growth and understanding can happen, because the Germans come with one. I mean, if we caricaturize it, the Germans come with a specific mindset which is very fixed and rigid and process oriented, and the Indians come with a mindset that's more flexible, as we like to say. And an example of this is if I go to my kitchen and I tell my cook, I say, listen, I want you to make this dish, and this is how much salt you put, and this is how long you put it in the oven for, or this is how long you fry it for. Consistency will never be there, because she'll think that, hey, I know better than him. This
Right.
doesn't work. I mean, you know how when Indian cooks cook our different curries, they don't exactly measure how much salt or how much curry powder they put. They do it as an approximation. So the food comes out slightly different every single time.
Right.
But so, I mean, for me, that's one very concrete example of how we're very flexible. But I think this is really how you can actually succeed in India. And one is by understanding the Indian mindset and perhaps trying to adapt and understand and accommodate for it. So as you said, timelines are never very fixed. Therefore, I mean, if you're intelligent and you know how India works, an intelligent project manager who's setting up the timelines will know how to build in buffers for that. He or she will know who to approach to get that information, to get a better sense of what timelines will look like. Land acquisition. I think in Europe, things are a lot more straightforward generally, a lot of these administrative procedures. But in India, of course, there are many variables. There are many different officials. There are many different systems that are not integrated as yet. Land ownership, for example. Even a lot of the French companies I speak to, the favorite word they use about India is compliqué. It's complicated, but it's complex for sure. But I think that's why you need a more comprehensive, intelligent, proper due diligence-based approach where you can then master the environment. And it's a question of approaching it like that. And if you're not used to it, of course, it takes a bit of adjustment, but it's possible. And I'm sure you'll agree with me that as firms spend more time in India, they get a better grasp of how things are actually done. And therefore, they get better control over how to do them better.
Absolutely. And I think so correct what you said, Mother. We've also seen it. We get a lot of interns coming from Germany, Mother. And I must say the younger generation among the Germans, much more open, wanting to try. For example, earlier, always the spice factor or the chilies used to be a major issue. Now I find the younger generation actually wanting to try the chilies, wanting to try street food. So, I think in the last few years, I've seen a tremendous shift in the attitude of the Germans coming to India, and they're much more open, much more world open, and trying street food, trying the spices, trying achar in India. So it's a whole lot of changes what we have seen, because when I recollect when I was in Germany way back almost 25 years back, I
Yes.
landed up, Mother, in a small town, and hardly anyone spoke English in that town, and it was always very difficult to communicate, because when I went to Germany, my German also needed a lot of improvement.
Yes.
So it was interesting that time. Hardly anyone spoke English, and now you go, I think it's 90% of the people there understand. At least in the business scenario, you'll hardly meet, except on the shop floor, you'll meet people. But otherwise, at least, and those who are not so conversant in English also make the effort to speak some words in English. So I think from the German side also, there's been a substantial change over the years.
Rajesh, I wanted to ask you a question about emerging technologies or disruptive innovations that you think are on the horizon. So as an example, ADAG, the German engineering firm, they recently held their first summit in India. One of the things that they talked about was this digital twin. In fact, they had an Apple Vision headset that you put it on and you were standing on the factory floor, with 40-foot, 50-foot high ceilings, and you could walk around and look at different machines. And, the example they had there was for a battery production line. And they said, we create the factory, we create the processes all virtually. So then you know what to place where, what kind of collision, if there are any accidents or potential accidents or downtime that may happen, you can really optimize the way your factories are built. And I thought, wow, we need that also in India. So as an example, what are some of the trends? And they're talking about Industry 5.0 as well now. So what do you think will have the most significant impact on these Indo-German engineering partnerships in the coming decade?
Right. I'll highlight a few sectors actually, Madhav, where I see a lot of potential. But coming back first to what you said about the digital twin, I think automation, industry 4.0 application, industry 5.0, if we call it. So these are, I think, applications which will see more enhanced activity in India. In fact, as VDMA, we've gone a little deeper also in these
Yes.
subjects. We have done about, I think now 6 seminars talking about interoperability between machines. And this is very important, Mother, because this we are looking to collect real-time data. And for collecting real-time data amongst the machine, there has to be this interoperability amongst the machines. So there is a seamless transfer of data, irrespective of whichever system you're using. So we've gone into that also. We've done 6 seminars in the last 2 years or 3 years on this topic. Another sector which I feel would really get a boost is the medical technology sector, Madhav. I find a lot of interest of the German European companies. In fact, India is developing also substantially on the medical technology front. There's so much of scope in India, and we ourselves had organized a delegation visit this year. We did a seminar also on medical technology. We had German companies who had not yet, they came first time to India. Actually, they're not ventured in the Indian market through this seminar. That is certainly happening. And of course, on the renewable energy front, there is a lot of scope that is there. Even when we look at, for example, solar technology now, that is, again, the German companies are very upbeat about that, and they are looking at India also as a good market. Even we have done a seminar on this solar technology this year. We did it in Gandhinagar. We did a seminar, and perhaps we will get a delegation visit also coming in next year. So these, and of course, e-mobility now. E-mobility is going to be a big topic in India. There's a
Yes.
lot of thrust from the government side, and I think this would also in the coming years, we already see a good penetration of two-wheeler and three-wheeler industry. So battery production is an important topic. We had a German company just 2 weeks back. They did a very nice seminar specifically on this battery foil
Yes.
technology, which has a big impact on the on battery production. And another sector which perhaps would be coming up, I'm sure, is the green hydrogen. Now, India has large plans for green hydrogen. We want to produce 5 million metric tons of green hydrogen by 2030. And I think this is, again, one field where we will see a lot of collaboration, a lot of activities among the German and the Indian companies. And again, here as VDMA, we did a seminar also on green hydrogen beginning of this year. And I think, again, we will do something next year also on this topic. So these are the predominant sectors. Think there is going to be a lot of development, and of course automation, robotics, automation, these are sectors which have application in various fields, and this would also, I think, continue to develop. And the interaction, we are finding more and more now collaboration or new German companies also in this field coming to India. And I'll just like to highlight, Madhav, in fact, next week in Munich we are doing a India Day at one of the exhibitions called Automatica, which happens in Munich, which is on the automation side. And believe me, we are getting a very good registration from the German or European companies to attend this India Day event. So I think this sector or this field will continue to play an important role also in the future.
So Rajesh, what I'm hearing from you is there's automation is going to be the future, is one of the key trends, and also sustainability in the sense of renewable energy. Now, sustainability, as we all know, is a core German value. In fact, they've aligned their economy maybe a little too much on being very sustainable. So I'd like to know, how are German engineering firms in India leading the way or leading by example in adopting sustainable manufacturing practices? And I mean, you already talked about how VDMA is also promoting these green technologies, but are German Mittelstand or other engineering firms, are they already adopting these sustainable practices in how they operate in India?
Absolutely, Madhav. In fact, whatever we are seeing now, the new factories coming up from the German side or European companies, factories which are designed in such a way that you get natural light coming into, you don't need so much lighting, more environmentally friendly. So many of these companies who have manufacturing factories or setup, now they are installing from day one the solar panels on these factories. So in fact, their aim is to generate the energy, at least 60-70% of the energy requirement they're generating through these solar panels. And what they are trying to take from the grid is also they're trying to buy renewable energy than just any energy. So this is certainly, I think, one aspect. And even in fact, companies who had these factory setups, now they're also looking to use the factory sheds for the solar cells. So this is an important aspect we are seeing being followed by most of the German companies. And circularity, circular economy, reutilizing the material or packaging. In fact, there is where we are seeing a lot of development happening. Rather than using the bulky packaging wastage of material, they're
Yes.
really trying to use the packaging one which is can be reused again, and also limit or have certain plastics which are biodegradable if they are being used for packaging. So I think circularity, sustainability plays a very important role. And in fact, most of the large companies already have targets set from the head office. Many are looking by 2030 to become basically a zero emission
Yes.
company. And that is, I think, very from the head office, there are clear instruction, and companies are working on how they can become a zero emission unit by, say, 2030 or by 2032. So certainly, I think German companies are very progressive on this front of sustainability and circularity. And again, as VDMA, we also did a seminar on circular economy. And in fact, we had almost about 12 German companies who presented technology talking about circular economy. This was more focused on the plastic sector, Madhav.
Okay, so that brings me to our second last question here. Beyond VDMA's institutional goals, of course, what is your personal vision for this, for the future of Indo-German relations in the engineering manufacturing sector? And specifically, what excites you most about what's to come?
A very nice question, Madhav. And certainly, I think what is really exciting me, as I mentioned, I go back to my story,
Yes.
this interaction of the shift in perception of India. And for me, it's at this stage, it's a very exciting phase to see so many German companies coming to India and realizing the potential of India and trying to utilize the potential of India. I think that is so important. And queries we are getting almost, I think it's every day some query coming from a German company. In fact, just after this podcast today evening, I have two virtual meetings with two different companies. I tell my colleagues the number of German CEOs I've met in the last 2 years, I have not met in my 24 years of
Wow.
journey with VDMA. So this is, I think, it excites me certainly to see the interest in India, because this is what we've been striving over the years. We've been trying to, as VDMA India, trying to promote the potential of India and helping in these collaboration between German and Indian companies. And now I think it's where it's drawing fruits. Now we are seeing these development taking very concrete shapes. And so I'm very excited also about the upcoming period, because I'm very optimistic that this momentum that is there in the Indian economy would sustain itself over the next decade. And I'm sure we will have more and more German European collaborations coming into India, companies who have not ventured. In fact, we still have among VDMA members, Madhav, a lot of companies were still not in India. So certainly my goal or my aim is to get more and more new German companies or European companies to come to India, Madhav.
That's fantastic. And that brings me to my last question, which dovetails very well into this. So for young German professionals, as you were saying, you have a lot of interns. For young German professionals looking to make a career in India, or maybe Indian professionals looking to work with German firms, what is some key advice that you would like to share or offer to them?
Especially for, let me start from the German side. To the German side, I would certainly like to say that if you're coming to India or you want to do business in India, you certainly need time and patience. I think that is very important. You need to have a lot of patience if you're doing business, because it's not something, even if you're coming to close a deal. We've seen companies had planned that they come in the morning thinking that they'll sign the deal because they thought everything was already discussed, and they had booked the flight in the evening. And in fact, they landed staying 2 or 3 days, because at the first meeting there was the first line of people, and then the boss stepped in on the day 2, and then he had his own requirements. So you need a lot of time and patience doing business in India. And of course, I think understanding the Indian culture, because we are a complex country, we are a very diverse country, and our strength, as I say, in fact, there's a lot of chaos in our country, but there's a structure in the chaos also. And trying to understand the structure within this chaos, I think that would be my suggestion to the German side and to the Indian companies going overseas. I think what is very important is commitment. That is very important. You should go with a clear cut focus and with a commitment. If you're making a commitment, stick to your commitment. Be true to your commitment. That is very important, because Germans are very good partners, very long-term partners. And I think it's difficult to crack this ice, but once you've cracked it, then it becomes a very long long-term beneficial business relationship, which will also help in tremendous growth for the Indian company. But you need to understand that initially and look at how, if you are, quality becomes an important aspect, commitment becomes an important aspect, Madhav.
Rajesh, I fully agree with you, and I wanted to thank you so much for sharing these very insightful and observations and learnings from your very unique journey. I think you've had a very unique experience, as you said, from your childhood, and it's wonderful to see that you stayed in this path throughout, and you now are today one of the keystones of this collaboration between
Thank you.
India and Germany. So thank you so much for sharing your learnings and your insights, and I hope to see you soon.
Thank you. Thank you for this interesting discussion. Even I thoroughly enjoyed the discussion and took me back the memory lane almost to my journey with Germany from 91 and earlier also. So thank you so much, Madhav.